Christine, remember when you were a kid and you thought that your career was going to be this like perfect straight line trajectory?
Oh my, yes. That is not at all what happened. It ended up being way more of a squiggle than I could have ever imagined. And I am so happy that I embraced all of the squiggles along the way.
Welcome back, everyone, to Embrace the Squiggle, the podcast for anyone whose career or life looks nothing like a straight line. And honestly, this is where all the good stuff happens. We are Colleen.
I'm Christine.
And this is episode 91 with Tina Games. Welcome, Tina.
Hello. So happy to be here with both of you today. Thanks for having me.
So excited. So we always start with how we know people. And I will say, Tina, like you and I know each other a couple years now from the Mass State Commission on the Status of Girls and Women, or I butcher that name so often. But I am on the commission and you are the person who is in charge of that for the state of Massachusetts. So we connected a few years ago around that. So excited to have you on today because I have not heard your full story, but I know from some of the other commissioners that you have a very squiggly life and story.
I do.
So,
and I can't wait to tell it.
I am so excited to hear it. All right. So we're going to start with little Tina. So what did little Tina think she was going to be when she grew up?
I love this question because little Tina wanted to be an actress. And when I go back into my own story, I think once we kind of get older, like I'm 61. So I've had these little pivotal points in my life where I'll reflect back. And I always think back to little Tina and all these productions. And back in, I guess it was the 70s, I used to run around with a tape recorder with little cassette tapes, and I would create my own like movies, TV shows. And at, I guess, 8, 9, 10 years old, I was interviewing my family. I was interviewing my neighbors, the kids. That was kind of where I thought I would be going. Acting, being the television announcer, or producing and directing. And that's kind of where I thought I would be going. That's where little Tina wanted to go.
All right. And I feel like that's a not uncommon one, right? That we hear, kids like that idea of being an actor in theater and that piece. So fast forward, you finished school, and what did you kind of study in school, and what did you think you were going to be when you finished?
So little Tina started out with a little tape recorder, but when I got to, I guess, what we now call middle school, was called junior high back in my day. And I got into drama, got into the theater classes, and then in high school was in the plays and all that stuff. So when I wanted to go to college, I wanted to go and study theater. That was what I wanted to do. My dad, however, had a hard conversation with me and said, I am not going to pay for you to go and be a starving artist. So you need to find something else.
We hear that
really
often too. Right. I was going to say, we hear that often too, right? Parents who have a hard time getting behind fields that they don't see as the possibility to make a quote unquote good living at, right? Or an easy good living at.
Exactly. And so I was crushed. However, he was the one picking up the bill. So I pursued communications. It was something he and I could, negotiate around. And I had to kind of tell him how I was going to make money and X, Y, and Z. So I majored in communications, but I still was involved in theater at my university level and had great reviews, from local critics and things like that. But that still wasn't enough for my dad. So I pursued that communications degree. And when I graduated college, I was in radio, television, broadcasting. That's kind of where I was for about a decade coming out of college, in news, news director for radio and television. And so that was my journey through my 20s. And then it begins to squiggle.
Nice. Okay. So start telling us. So what did you do after that? Right? You got those first jobs, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second.
Yeah. So the interesting story, I loved being in front of the mic, loved being in front of the camera. But one of the things I learned was the money wasn't as great as perhaps I thought it should be, or maybe even my dad still whispering over my shoulder. So I had an opportunity kind of in a PR lens, kind of a public relations lens, kind of opened up for me right at the end of my 20s, going into my 30s in property management. So we squiggle from this to this. So I'm getting into property management, and I decided I kind of liked it. It was like renting at these big condos or whatever they were at the time, apartments, units, townhomes, things like that. And I decided I kind of liked it. And I started making really good money. And once I got kind of hooked on that money thing, I was like, oh, even though my heart was still kind of over here, I was going off in this direction for the money piece of it. But I still kept at that time a weekend gig at a country music station in North Carolina where I was a DJ. So I was a weekend DJ. So it kind of still had that little piece so that it didn't completely lose it. And I was making money over here. So I kind of squiggled into property management for a long time. And the squiggly move took me all over the place. So I grew up in North Carolina, but the squiggly move in property management took me up and down the East Coast. So it started opening doors for me. Like I've lived in New York City, I lived in Boston, I lived in Atlanta, I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, Washington, D.C. So that whole squiggly door started to open. And I thought, oh, I'm kind of liking this. I'm kind of liking going up and down and living in all these places. So that is where that opened. And I can go on if
Yeah.
you.
Well, I was going to say, and I think during those years, a neighbor and I were just talking about this. He has a daughter who's a traveling nurse, right? And that whole idea of like in your 20s or at any point really, but when you're not tied down to a mortgage, when you're not tied and you have that ability to just move around
Yeah.
right? And be able to say yes to opportunities that it's not the same sometimes at other phases of your life, right? There are times in your life where you can just say yes to any opportunity that comes your way. So
Exactly.
that courage you had to even jump in and say yes to all of those opportunities.
Well, and just the piece around the travel, so many people don't know how to work that into their career. And, it is possible. I'm just thinking, in terms of needs. And I know for me, I need variety. And thankfully, when I was in higher education, I was based at a different campus to my home team. And so I got to travel back and forth, which actually fed that need of being in different locations. And then there was travel part of my role. So every so often I could leave Vancouver and go to Toronto or wherever I was going. But it's really, and even in this day and age, there are ways to weave those pieces into our positions. But I feel people are just so narrow-minded that they can't see outside the box and get creative in terms of, okay, how can I negotiate this in that it may not be that I'm a traveling nurse, so I'm on the road every week, but maybe it's once a quarter, or maybe it's being able to go somewhere else and work remotely for, a week or two. So I actually never even thought that property management could move you to that degree.
Were you working
Yeah,
for the
it
same
did.
company, Tina, that they
It
just moved
actually
you
was
around?
it was with different companies.
Yeah.
It started out with a company within the state of North Carolina. So because I grew up in Raleigh, so the first move went to Charlotte. And then from there, I think in property management, when you're kind of good at what you do, other people are trying to pick you up. So I ended up working with maybe 3 different property management companies, just in meeting different people. And that would take me places. And so the other thing about property management that I learned about myself is how much I love travel. I was just this little girl growing up in North Carolina, and my family, like I was born in Kentucky. So I have my family in Kentucky, the immediate family in North Carolina. I hadn't really gone too much at that point in my life, that much outside the box, until this opportunity. And then I became more comfortable with travel. I was able to go internationally, not with this job, but with friends that I knew, and I felt more comfortable doing it as a just by myself, meeting people in Paris, things like that. So travel really did teach me a little bit about myself and the adventure I had within me. It
Oh,
also opened up an interest in travel writing.
Oh, I love it.
And travel writing, so this is another squiggly. So along that path, travel writing started to appeal to me because I started to read about all these places. And because I did have a background in journalism, broadcast journalism, I did have a stint in print journalism. And writing about real estate was another thing that popped in. That's another squiggly I'll go to in just a minute when I had kids. So in this little squiggly property management, when I landed in New York City, I met my husband on day one. Literally day one. I got there with my 3 cats at the time. I'm driving out, and trying to get myself in my apartment, but I started pretty much my job. But I met my husband day one. So in that property management, another thing that opened up was corporate housing. So I'd started out in property management, just leasing these apartments to everyday folks. But along that journey, because I did kind of have a good business sense, and I think people recognize that, they pulled me into the corporate piece of it. So then all of a sudden I'm working with companies, corporations, relocating their folks all over the world when I landed in that realm. And through that is where I met my husband. So I met my husband in New York City, day one. And, we've been up and down the East Coast for a lot of different reasons. So that happened. Yeah, that happened. And certainly didn't see that coming at that point in my life. And so then I'm going into my 30s. And that happened for about 5 years until I got pregnant. And this is another squiggly that I'm happy to dive into. Here's kind of, for me, there's so many pivotal points in my life, as I'm sure we all have, but this was a really pivotal one for me because when I got pregnant, my husband and I had a really difficult conversation because my son, first of all, he was unexpected. So we kind of had this vision. I was going to go back to work. I'd stay at home for whatever, time, and then I'd go back to work and we put him in daycare. But he was born with minor health conditions, but they were enough that kind of jeopardized his immune system. And the pediatrician literally said to me, not to my husband, but to me, do you really have to be working right now? I think the best thing for this child would be if his mother could stay at home with him for a couple of years. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because I'm a worker. I'm a person that works. And so staying at home wasn't on my radar. And so that little squiggly, it was hard. And I am going to share this. This is another part of my story. I made the choice, what I felt was best for my son, but it really, truly was not best for me. I fell into a 2-year depression. I had a really hard time. I lost myself in that 2-year journey. I kept saying to myself, I'm a mother, but who am I really? I did not realize until that decision just how much career work was a part of my identity. And that was hard. And here comes the next squiggly. In that journey, I started to connect with mothers who probably I may never have met without that experience. And I started to talk to women, and I started finding out I was not alone in that kind of story.
not at
And
all, right?
yeah, yeah. And my own mother, who, I kind of had, like some of us do, I kind of had an up and down relationship with my mom growing up. But that experience brought us together because she started to share things about her story that I had never known before and some of the depression she had gone through. And that really changed my whole relationship with my mom.
Amazing.
And she became my confidant during that really difficult time. And then the next squiggly that happened for me career-wise was I started thinking, what can I do with this? All these women, myself, like, what can I do? So I became a coach, a life coach. Life coaching, I started, I don't know, it just kind of popped up. I became a life coach. I did some certifications. And I just want to share this because I've got two of them. It led to my first book, which is kind of in workbook form because what happened during that really depressing time is I created this relationship with the moon because my son he was going through those health issues. My husband was working full time. My son was up all night. I started to develop this relationship with the moon. And I'd put my son down to sleep for a couple hours. I'd go in our living room at the time, and there was this bay window, and I'd just sit with my journal. I'm a big journal writer. And I would just journal, and I kept seeing night after night different phases of the moon. And all these things started coming to me, and I started like writing how I was feeling. And I realized there were some things happening within myself that kind of matched the phases of the moon and the tides and the dark moon and the full moon. And I created a body of work out of this. And not only the book, but also a card deck, a journaling card deck. And so I started teaching workshops, when my husband could help or when we could get a babysitter, somebody would come in and watch my son. I would teach workshops. And next thing you know, I'm in the journaling world. All of a sudden, I'm in the journaling world. And I started meeting all of these pioneers, if you will, in the journal writing world, in the transformational writing world. And that was a whole other squiggly line. And that was probably happening around 35, 36, 37, 38. And I will keep going. But that's where I was at that moment.
Well, I just want to say how fitting is this conversation post the Pisces full moon last night.
Yeah.
I would just like to shout that out. I know this episode won't drop for a few weeks, but how perfect is this?
Yes, it is perfect. And again, it goes back to just discuss or being open. And I think this is what came to me in this whole life coaching and what I really realized, because, people go through these life changes and there's grieving happening, of this identity that you thought, and you go through all these stages like somebody has died, it's because your identity is being transformed. And so I was going through all of those phases of grieving, which I do talk about in my mothering book and the process, and really giving women permission to feel those things, because that kind of leads us into the next phase. Like once we get through all those sad and angry emotions, then we can start thinking about, well, what does this all mean? Where's this going? Where's this leading? What did I gain? What did I learn? And so that went in that direction. And then the squiggly from there. So I worked with moms probably up through my 40s. And then I started noticing that a lot of the women that were coming to me at that time in my maybe early to mid 40s were highly creative women. I started noticing a thread of these different women showing up. And they were artists and writers and innovators. I mean, just really high creative level people. And then I started noticing and working with them that I had that myself, and so it kind of takes me all the way back to little Tina, who wanted to be an actress, who wanted to write plays and TV scripts and direct, So all of a sudden, this squiggly was coming back a little bit and spiraling, and all of these stories were coming back to me about little Tina, and is little Tina showing up again here at this point. And so that kind of led to my next phase of work, which was working with very highly creative women and noticing that there is a midlife, there's a whole other thing going on here with midlife and women. And so I was noticing that I was attracting 40, 50, 60, and even 70-year-old women at that point in my life. And all of them were going through some type of life transition that brought them into this place of questioning. Who am I? Where am I going? Like, what does this all mean? And that led to my second book, Journaling by the Moonlight, because I took the Journaling by the Moonlight process that I created for moms and I adapted it to the highly creative woman. And the second book, Journaling by the Moonlight, Unearthing Your Creative Calling in Midlife. This whole thing took me back to my theater days. And what did I learn? Like I started noticing where my theater self was showing up. even in property management, even in PR. All of these things I was doing in public service. I have to say this too. Public service surfaced for me probably my late 30s, early 40s when my daughter arrived on the scene. Because public service kind of landed. It was a neighbor down the street that knew that I had kind of a writing background and had invited me to be a newsletter editor for our community network. And in that, what I didn't realize at the time, I had all these political folks living in my neighborhood that I didn't even realize lived there. So as I step into this role, and that was a volunteer position, the newsletter writing, I started meeting all these people, and it led me to working on political campaigns. It led me to working on in nonprofits. It led me to the Alexandria Commission on the Status of Women in Virginia. That was my first dive into public policy and legislation, because in all of that newsletter writing and interviewing and all these things I was doing, somebody said, you would be a fantastic, I was living in Alexandria, Virginia at that time, right outside of DC. You would be a fantastic commissioner. So I went and put my application in, did my little interview with the city council, and I got appointed. And that opened up a whole new world for me about public policy and legislation on issues that matter to women and girls.
Hey, I just want to jump in here because there's this underlying like courage, confidence,
Openness to change.
openness to change. I mean, there's so many ways that we can describe. And, women will hold themselves back, full stop. They, for a million different reasons, million different narratives. And so before we continue on, I would love for you to share your words of wisdom to somebody who might be sitting here listening to your story, so inspired, and yet paralyzed in terms of taking a step, Squiggle, putting their name out there for something. What would you share with them to help maybe get them to take that first step?
So in my coaching world, when I was working with moms, and I certainly have done this with highly creative women, I'm all about synchronicity. And I invite women into a space of what I would call open and allowing. And just being open and aware of things that are just happening, that you didn't really create yourself. Maybe you did, but there are things that are happening. And I'm going to share some wisdom that really came through my mother. Here's another squiggly. My mother passed away suddenly at the age of 68. And I remember getting the phone call, and my husband, our kids, we were going away for the weekend, and I answered the phone, and I was just shocked. But the interesting thing about that is the day before, my mother had called me. She was wanting to check on something that was going on with my son at school. And one of the things she said, I think it was like, might have been the last couple of sentences before we hung up the phone. And she said this about my son, but it applied to me and everybody else. She said about my son, if he could only learn to move with the flow of life, everything will be easier. And the way that I took that was, rather than keep resisting all of this change, sometimes the universe, I'm a very spiritual person, so I hope you don't mind if I bring that in.
Oh, I don't. I'm like, I need to get on a plane and come and hang out with you.
So, but I believe the universe, Mother Nature, whatever you want to call it, is always sending us messages if we're paying attention.
Yes.
If we are open and allowing, if we're moving with the flow of life, like my mother said. I think when, and this is these are things that I taught my kids that I wish I had when I was younger. If we got our blinders on and we become too attached to certain outcomes,
yes,
we're just not going to see all of this. And even this journey of this outcome may or may not even happen. So I think I've always said, believed, taught that let's throw the intention out there. It's almost like shoot for the moon and allow yourself to land among the stars.
Yeah.
because there's something, I believe the universe always knows more than we do. And the universe always has something bigger for us than we probably can even think about for ourselves, but we just have to be able to allow it and notice it. And I'm going to share one other piece of wisdom. There was a writing, this was during the summer of 2020 COVID, and I was in a virtual writing conference that normally you would go to in person. But I was in a writing conference, and it was a keynote speaker, and it was a well-known fiction writer. And he said to us, it was always his goal to leave the reader with an ending that they didn't see coming. And that landed with me. Oh my gosh, did that land with me? Because I decided, and I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying this, I took that, I want to be pleasantly surprised. And I can't be pleasantly surprised if I'm too attached to what I think should happen. So if I can detach myself and do my work, put out my intentions, but if I don't get too attached, then I'm freeing myself up to catch something from the universe that might not land with me if I'm too close like this. It just might fly me by. So I have always, in my life coaching, my creativity coaching work, I've always taught the magic of synchronicity. Just pay attention. Stop in any given moment and notice. Just notice. What are you noticing? What are you noticing? Is we're moving so fast sometimes, we're not even noticing things. And when you start to notice and move with the flow of things, like I started in this book, I kind of circled back to all of these pivotal moments that now I can reflect back on. And I think, oh my gosh, had I been like this wouldn't have happened. But because I was open and allowing, I allowed all these people to come in. I allowed this shift to happen. I allowed a relocation to happen. So all of these opportunities of being open and allowing kept leading and leading and leading and leading. So that's my wisdom.
And
Love it.
It's being open to that, like almost gut instinct too. It's right. Like we
Yeah.
know this somewhere deep in our bodies know these things,
Yeah.
right? If we pause to actually see them, I think
Right.
sometimes we're just moving so fast that, it's the bull in a china shop kind of moment, right? Like you're just plowing through as quickly as you can and you're just forgetting to see what's around you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then the other squiggly that came out of all of that, out of like serving on the commission in Alexandria, Virginia, when I moved to Cape Cod, which is where I now live. When we moved to Cape Cod, it was right after my mother had passed, and then my husband's mother passed less than a year later. I mean, we were like having our mothers leaving us less than a year, and there was all these things happening, and we're just taking in all of this. But we made the decision at that time because at that time we were thinking of leaving the DC area and going to the West Coast was kind of the plan. But my mother passed away suddenly. My husband's mother passed away 11 months later. And we're thinking, oh, I don't know if we can be on the West Coast. My husband's British. So we needed to be England, North Carolina. We needed to kind of be somewhere in the middle on the East Coast so that changed. I mean, again, open and allowing. We were thinking Portland, Oregon. We were thinking Seattle, Washington. Okay, that didn't happen. Cape Cod happened. There were a lot of things that we liked about the Cape. We had been to the Cape for a couple of summer vacations. It also reminded my husband of English towns. So it just made sense. So we landed on the Cape. My kids had a wonderful educational experience on the Cape. They both have now graduated college. So, and in coming to the Cape, the first thing I said as I'm looking and trying to get to know people, where's the Commission on the Status of Women? And so I did some Googling and I found out that there was a Cape Cod Commission on the Status of Women. So I put my application in and I got to know all these women and I got appointed. And through that work for 6 years, the state commission, the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women, of who I knew a lot of folks there, created a job. This was in January 2022. They recognized that all the regional commissions needed some help other than what they were providing. And I was part of that push to make that happen. So they created a job and put it out. And at that time, I thought, I'm going to apply for that job. It just kind of hit me Like, I'm going to put my name in for that job. So I applied. And one of the things I said to myself, in all honesty, and this is probably the small part of me talking, I'm going to be real transparent. The small part of me said, Tina, you're too old for this. I'm probably looking for somebody a little younger, blah, 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 blah. But it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me. I listened to that little voice and I said, no, I'm still going to do it. Because even if I don't get it, there's a lot I want to say to them in this interview. There's a lot I want them to know about regional commissions and what they need to do. So I took that opportunity. I decided I was going to go into the interview and I had my laundry list of things I wanted them to know. 2 weeks later, I got the call and they offered me the job.
Dang, of course they did, because you were unattached to the outcome.
Right. Right, exactly.
You were unattached. I can
Yeah.
I'm having a tough time contributing to this conversation. I'm lost. Not at a loss for words.
Yeah, and the other squiggly, by being in this job is how I met Colleen and why I'm here. And so, you kind of like one dot leads to the next.
Yes.
And I'm still in the job. It's a full-time, regional commissions director. So I oversee 11 regional commissions and support their work. And I still have my coaching gig on the side. But it's just one dot goes to the next. And you just have to be willing to follow it. It's like a dot to dot book. You just have to put the crayons out and kind of see. Because once you do it, you're like, oh, you don't see the visual of it until you do the dots. It's like the constellation in the sky. Until you start connecting the dots, then you suddenly see what the picture is.
Yeah.
I think so often we don't see it until we look back, right? Like you always think, oh God, this feels like it's, somebody threw up all over the page, right? Like it's all over the page. And then when you look back, you're like, wait a sec, I can totally connect these things. Might have been some loop-de-loops and squiggles along the way, right? But you can start to see that thread that connects thing, right? That kind of invisible string that just connects everything.
Yeah. And that's the other piece of this. If I can give another piece of wisdom, it would be to notice the threads.
Yes.
Because the themes are always there. I strongly believe, even since we were little girls, those threads have always been there. They've just shown up in different ways.
Oh, 100%. When people say to me, how long have you been coaching? I say, actually, since I was 8 years old, I've been in a coaching capacity, and it started with teaching little kids how to skate on the ice. And then, and anyways, it completely threads, and it makes perfect sense why I've come full circle around and doing the things that I'm doing today in 2025. It makes perfect sense. But yet, there I was at 8 years old teaching little kids how to, pick themselves up off the ice and stand on the slippery, right? Like there's a metaphor right there that I've never actually called out until right this minute.
Didn't match. Yes.
Moment here. Honestly, and that's what I was doing as an 9-year-old, was supporting my coach. I figure skated competitively, and I would go over after we trained on Sunday mornings, and she coached all the other, all the member kids, and I'd go over just to help. There I was, teaching people how to stand, little kids how to stand up on the ice.
Yeah.
And the other metaphor I use myself that sort of reflects what you're saying is, don't dam the river, right? Like, don't dam the river, because everything just explodes out the sides.
Yeah. And you gain what you just said, you gain a lot of skills and things that you, for whatever reason in the moment, you might not have thought it was important.
All the
But
time.
we're always getting skills and all of these things that in all these many squiggles that come full circle at a particular point. And we're like, oh, I'm glad I got that skill because it's helping me in this.
And it's the transferability, and even just bringing it back around to what you were talking about in terms of creativity, my experience has been individuals who have been very curious about the arts is where those dreams or get squashed, because so many people, like, there's still that stigma or that stereotype that an arts degree will get you nowhere, which is the furthest thing from the truth. And so people are suppressing their creativity in whatever form that will be. And, it's interesting. I had my own aha moment that I didn't share with Colleen. We were doing a co-working session before we jumped on here. I'm highly creative, and yet I've completely channeled all of my creativity into words, whether I'm speaking or I'm writing or whatever. And I've been in this space of low fuss factor. And yesterday I sat down and I looked at a project that Colleen and I are working on, and I was like, I can do this. And I did it. And I thought, wow, the fact that I've been saying I've got low fuss factor has actually roadblocked me from doing a million different things. Updating my own website, doing some of the projects Colleen and I have worked on, leaning on hiring someone, paying somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, well, that narrative is actually it's not working to my advantage right now.
Well, and I think we also tell ourselves things that aren't true, right? Because once we start telling ourselves this, we believe it, right? That inner narrative in our brains that we tell ourselves, gosh, if we could get everybody to change their own inner narrative to be one of courage and to be one of excitement and adventure and let me be open to things or open to the universe or see what's coming our way, what a difference it would make for every single one of us.
Yeah. You know what you're reminding me of? There's a coaching question I always like to ask people. And I always start because they're in that kind of negative space. So what's the worst that could happen?
Oh, I use that all the time.
And what's the best that could happen?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And let's look at the difference. Yeah. So, that's one that always, yeah.
I love that one. What's the worst thing that could happen? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those in the corporate world, it's like, if you don't do that right now in this hot minute, is this company going to go out of business? Oh, it's not.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that's
Well, and I think I was sharing actually this morning with somebody that I think as mothers, because I was thinking about, coming to this conversation today, and I was thinking about with mothers, one of the gifts I think women, especially when they choose to have children, we learn to be adaptable, because a lot of things, like our kids, we can't always predict things, with our kids. And I think we're learning how to be adaptable, even in our minds, of thinking about something different, like the fiction writer who said, I just want to, write an ending that catches everybody by surprise. So I'm always playing these games with myself. Like, what could be the surprise in this, because it's easy to fall down that little hole of this isn't going to work. What in the heck, who am I? Blah, 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 blah. But what if it does? Like, what if this is my moment that the universe is going to surprise me? I won't know unless I give it a go. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay, because I'm now somewhere different. And where can I'm at a different point. So what can I see? We're different. And where can I, this point? So there's a whole lot of shaping of our thinking. If we're different, and where can
Thank you so much, Tina, for
Oh
jumping on today.
I love it.
We're so excited to have had this.
The invitation.
Yeah. So let's jump into our lightning round, because we always end with some fun, quick questions here. So our first is, what are you currently binging or watching on TV these days?
Do you want me to start that? I don't watch television.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I do not watch television. So every now and then, I'll be honest, during COVID, I did binge on The Crown, and I watched all 4 seasons, and then it was over, and I was very upset. And then the other thing I was binging on over COVID was it was Stanley Tucci's Italy series.
Oh,
and then that ended, but he's now picked it up somewhere else, and so I try to catch it. But I'm not a TV watcher.
Nice. Okay, so how about podcasts? Are there any podcasts that you're binging
Podcasts,
these days?
I'm getting into them more and more. I actually really enjoyed yours, I have to be honest. I went and watched several episodes.
Excellent. Okay, so let's jump into some other fun ones. How about what color brings you joy?
Ooh, color. Well, I love green and purple. Purple and green have all ever since like little Tina loved. Oh, look at you. Oh, yes. Little Tina loved green. And as little Tina started getting older, I loved purple. And here's the interesting, here's another synchronicity. They became my branding colors later on. But green and purple are always, I notice them everywhere I go. So that, yeah, it's magic to me.
And look, and the
Nice.
co-hosts of today's podcast with you have green.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Love it. Isn't that great?
Love it.
beautiful synchronicity.
Oh, yes.
All
So
right.
great.
And what is your favorite place on earth?
Oh, gosh. So I'm a nature gal. Anytime I can be in the forest, I joke and say that I'm a fairy because I love the forest. I just love the forest. But if I had to pick a country, like a place that I've traveled to, Iceland is magical. I've been to Iceland during the Northern Lights, and they're absolutely extraordinary. Stayed up all night. And then I also went back during the midnight sun, equally as magical. So Iceland is always going to hold a very special place in my heart as far as a country goes, but put me in nature and I'm very, very happy.
Beautiful.
Nice. Yeah, Iceland is definitely on my to get to list. So,
Mine too.
Yes.
which gets longer every year. All right, and our last one is, what is your book recommendation?
Well, I'm going to do my little shameless plug.
Absolutely.
If you, like, literally, we're talking embrace the squiggle. And when my mother's book was really focused on the mothering process, but journaling by the moonlight, unearthing your creative calling in midlife is really about that squiggle. Because through the phases of the moon, journaling prompts, I've got a hard copy version and a paperback version and a deck of cards. But it really is about embracing the squiggle. And so it's a process that I created. It takes you back to those early childhood dreams that we were talking about. And it has you go back and really look at some of these pivotal moments and where you are now. So it really is. I just think it captures embracing the squiggle. So that's what I'm going to recommend.
Love it.
Love it. We'll definitely link that in the show notes. So if anyone's looking for it, they can click on that and get right to that book and your journals. These are great.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina, for being our guest today. So if our listeners want to find you or connect with you, where can they find you?
Please visit my website, themoonlightmuse.com. You're going to see my love of fairies over there because I got my little moving fairy and all the fairies, and you'll see the moonlight gardens and all the things I've talked about that I love. Themoonlightmuse.com. Would love to welcome you over there. And I have a free gift if you want to join my list.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This episode has been brought to you by Maxity, where we are reshaping how individuals and businesses thrive, using their strengths to achieve their highest goals through training and executive coaching. If today's conversation sparked something in you, an idea, a question, a little nudge to try something new, we'd love to hear about it. Drop us a message. We are Embrace the Squiggle on Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. So show up for those messy, nonlinear parts of your life, and we can figure it all out together. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina.
Is it time for you to add a little squiggle to your career? Join us every week to hear from another guest talk about how they embrace the squiggle.
Subscribe now and find your inspiration.